Welcome to The Mentor List, a source of sound advice with your host, David Lewis.
To seek support, and you need to allow yourself to be supported.
Really have a point of difference.
What is precious, what's really important, and then putting some boundaries there.
The Mentor List specialises in interviews with top business minds. Gather their advice for your career. This is The Mentor List.
Welcome to today's show. We have a captain of industry on the show today, Mike Smith. Mike was the former CEO of ANZ Banking Group from 2007 to 2015 and remained on as a board advisory until July 2017. He is the chair of York Butter Factory. York Butter Factory is the destination point for innovation in Australia. He also holds the position of Senior Advisor Asia Practice at PwC. And as Mike puts it, these days he's doing the things he wants to do. So not a bad place to be. If you haven't come across Mike's profile before, you're in for a real treat as Mike shares his banking career and insights which spread across many international banks and on a career that saw him travel and work across the globe. The morning of Mike's first day in a bank in the UK, he said to himself, "I'm going to run this place one day," and he certainly delivered on that promise. I hope you enjoy today's conversation with Mike Smith. Mike Smith, welcome to the Mentor List.
Okay, well, it's good to be here.
Well, yeah, thanks for letting us come down and see you here at ANZ, or it feels like the top of the town, level 43 here. Yeah, it's an amazing location that you're based at. So thanks for having us in today. Really appreciate it. So, yeah, really excited to sort of start digging into your story, and I know it's a big story, so I'm conscious that, we've got 20, 40 minutes.
No, maybe we can do 2 or 3 chapters.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that if you are, if you cut the time. We might just kick off. Do you want to share with the listeners a little about yourself?
My career? When I think back, what are the sort of influences and what happened to me in the early years, I guess the most important was that I was sent to boarding school in the UK. I was raised in Kenya, in East Africa.
Right.
And I guess that gave me an independence at an early age. From there, I went to university in London. And that was in the mid-late 70s, because I do look much younger than I am there. Really, the UK economy at that time was in a terrible mess. Right. And I really never thought about working so much in the UK as, to get out and find somewhere else to go. Originally, I was going to go in the Navy, and then I think the Royal Navy sold most of its ships, or scrapped them, and I really didn't think that was going to be a career. It was probably something I wanted to do when I was younger.
Yeah.
And then I decided, okay, probably the best way to get out into the world was through international banking.
Right.
So I applied for a number of international banks. Primarily American, and of course HSBC, which was then a Hong Kong bank in those days. Yes. They gave me a job offer before anyone else, so I took it.
Right. Okay. That's the start.
And that was the start. Yeah. Really, I didn't know anything about banking, other than when I went to cocktail parties with my parents in East Africa. I always thought that the nicest houses we ever went to seemed to be owned by bankers, right. So I thought it can't be a bad thing to do.
Must be something.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But actually, the first day I walked into the bank, I just knew that it was for me, and that was totally fortuitous. I really didn't know anything about it, and despite having an economics degree, so I knew how it worked. But, the interesting thing was I just felt totally comfortable. I got it, I understood it. And that was very lucky. And from there, I moved, I think about 10 countries that I've lived in. And over a 30-year career, almost 30 years with HSBC, I covered off on investment banking, retail banking, broking, general management, country management, operations strategy. I did most things in the discipline of banking. And of course, in 2007, I was approached to do the job at ANZ. And I was at a stage of my life where I thought, well, unless I make the change, now I'm going to be doing this for another 10 years or so. And who knows where I would have gone with that. But I really felt it was right for a change. I'd been to Australia before. I'd been here in the 80s. Two of my kids were actually born in Melbourne.
Okay.
And so I had an affinity with Australia and Melbourne in particular. So I decided, we'll do it. And, 10 years later, I'm still here.
Because the job's not keeping you here, so you obviously
No, I became an Australian citizen, and this is home. Very much home, and I've thoroughly enjoyed my time here. Apart from the tax.
Death and taxes, it's guaranteed.
But they're higher here than they are in most places.
They are, I agree. Okay, so I think when we were talking before, we were talking about a helicopter view of the career. I think that's probably a space shuttle view. So we might sort of jump back a little bit. And I mean, so maybe we could go to Argentina and talk about the reason for the move there, and I guess some of your experiences there.
Yeah, that was obviously with HSBC, and that was in 1997. What had happened is HSBC purchased a bank and financial services group called the Grupo Roberts in Argentina. It was basically a bank, a general insurance company, a life insurance company, a superannuation business, and a medical insurer. So the bank was half the business, and the other businesses were the other half, if you like.
Sure.
And they were countrywide. It was the fourth largest bank in the country, and actually, being a family-owned business, it was run in a very different way than HSBC would run something.
Yeah.
So my job was to go in and bring it into the HSBC family.
Right.
And I remember that I reported to the group CEO of HSBC at that time, who was in London. And like all large companies, we had KPIs which were on a form, about 15 pages thick, with all the stuff you had to do and whatever. And he sent this form to me with 2 words on it: fix it.
Right.
And I've always thought that was a brilliant lesson, because he knew what he wanted me to do, and I knew exactly what he wanted me to do. And it didn't need, a massive industry to explain it.
Got it.
So a good lesson. Keep it simple and and understandable.
Yeah.
So that worked really well. I mean, we I think the first 2-3 years were great, but then the financial crisis that hit Argentina in 2000, 2001, 2002 really hit the business hard, to the extent that there's some incredible things that happened. The banking system was effectively, it had its capital effectively stolen by the government, expropriated. And the way they did that was, at the time, the government, or the Argentine peso, was fixed to the US dollar as a peg.
Yeah.
They unpegged it, but at a different rate for assets and liabilities.
Okay.
So I woke up one morning to find I had no capital, which is, quite an issue. It's quite an issue.
Yes.
It created runs on the banks. It was an appalling
Is this
situation.
similar to the London people at the ATMs taking it?
Yeah, but it was much worse than that, and that the branches were literally mobbed. I mean, this was all banks, and finding ways to get cash to people and sort it out. Finding liquidity generally was very difficult. Then the government imposed a law that prevented people taking out their own money to a limit of something like $200 a day.
Okay.
And you can imagine people's reaction to that. So they blamed the banks and literally stormed them. We had to have steel plates welded to the outside of the branches. They were attacked. We had a gun battle inside our main office where a crowd of protesters actually were trying to burn the building down.
Wow.
And we managed to evacuate 1,000 people through, there was tear gas going off and bullets ricocheting around. And two people.
Action movie.
Oh, well, it was something crazy. And, 2 people were actually killed in that problem. But we got all our staff out safely.
Yeah.
And I was very pleased to do that. But prior to that, of course, I'd had my own little run-in with some corrupt members of the old organisation who hired a bunch of policemen to get rid of me. So there was an assassination attempt where my car was shot up. Fortunately, I was driving, so I managed to escape. But I did get shot through the leg, through the thigh. But that's quite a long story, and that will be.
That's
and that needs a couple of beers, and but it's actually quite a fascinating.
Jaguars, I understand.
Yeah, well, my Jag. Yeah, I had a Jag, and it got shot up pretty badly and kept going without tyres and with the engine full of bullet holes, and that car kept going and really saved my life.
Yeah.
I was able to get away and avoid these people, and I've owned a Jag ever since.
Yeah.
Because I'm loyal. I'm loyal to the brand.
How do you find them now? Now that Tata's sort of taking over, and
I think it's been a Jaguar, because I've got some old ones and they are very temperamental.
Right.
Sometimes they go, sometimes they don't. But when Ford bought the company, I think they did a fantastic job on really, getting the thing to proper quality control. And it always had good styling, I think.
Yeah.
But the company now is really allowed to run itself with very little interference from Tata. And I think they're doing a great job, really.
Fantastic models. There's a new SUV that's come out, and just great innovation. Sorry, it's a bit of a...
Yeah, just...
So we're back to... bullet holes, and so the assassination attempt. So this was in response to, I guess, a stand that you've taken when you've.
It was basically.
Message, or?
Yeah, I mean, I was talking about the superannuation business, and that had a very large marketing budget,
Right.
and the advertising agency and the marketing team had got a little deal going, and there was obviously money being skimmed off, and I couldn't really prove how much, but I knew something was happening. So, and I wasn't too sure who was involved. So in the end, I fired everybody, including all of the marketing department and the advertising agency. And in good South American style, they thought, well, if they removed me as the problem, things would go back to the way they were.
Get their jobs back.
Yeah,
Wow.
So, and that's a bit naive as well, if you think about it. But
Absolutely.
they hadn't worked with an international company before.
Yeah.
The standards that entails.
Mm. And so that's sort of a pretty instinctive action that you've taken. Do you find that would you call yourself an instinctive CEO?
I've become much more instinctive. I think when I first started my career, I was incredibly analytical.
Right.
And I've learned that actually instinct plays a very, very critical part. And funnily enough, we spend most of our lives suppressing our instincts.
Yeah.
Through social norms, for various reasons. And I actually think that you should rely on your instinct and your intuition far more than we do.
Yeah.
It was actually one of the things I learned from being, from the shooting was my security people said, look, if you have an instinct that you're in danger, act on it.
Yeah.
Act on it, and that way you'll probably be okay. Don't do what the social norm is. Be polite, whatever. Just do something. And it did save my life later in India when I was in the Taj Hotel, which was attacked, and I had a feeling something wasn't right.
Right.
And I left the hotel with my country manager to go to the airport early, 4 minutes before the attack. And we were in the car when I got a call from the Australian ambassador to say, Australian High Commissioner in India to say, where are you? Because I was going to see him anyway. And he said, I don't know if you've heard, but the central Bombay is under attack, and go to the airport now and get out of here.
Wow. And so you just had a feeling, you sort of
I just had an instinct. I said, something's not right, let's go. And it was that sense.
Yeah.
And I acted on it.
Yeah. Wow.
So, as another life gone.
Yeah. There's another podcast as well. Yeah, well, okay. So I guess that's a really good example of, taking a stand, because that had a huge impact around, your family life as well. And
Yeah, it did. I mean, when you have a near-death experience in whatever way, it does make you reconsider your priorities and your and the way that you live. And I would say that I'm a better person for that experience. I think before that I was far too ruthless. I was far too blindly ambitious, and I was like a blunt instrument, I think, and I left collateral damage everywhere.
right.
After that, I thought, there are different ways of achieving things, and you can bring people along, and that's much more effective than taking them on.
Yes. Oh, yeah, I bet. More enjoyable.
Well, it is actually, and it gives you a much less stressful life.
Yeah.
Now, I know, you could say that it's not necessary to be liked, and in certain roles it's difficult to be liked, but I think if you do the right thing by the organization and most people, people will respect you for that. And the one thing I've always thought about, what people have asked, how would you like to be seen as a manager, and what advice would you give on how to manage? I've always said, manage other people as you would like to be managed yourself. Because you can't go wrong then, can you?
Yeah, true.
But it's amazing how few people do that.
Yeah, and it's a simple message as well.
A very simple message, yeah, and I think it's a valid one. But there is no doubt that as you go through life, I guess it's this concept of wisdom. Wisdom comes with experience, and I think that as you experience more, your decision making becomes better.
Right.
Because it becomes defined by what you know.
Yeah.
And I've always said, I've never actually had any regrets, because when you make the wrong decision, you learn from that too.
Yeah.
And the next decision you come to, you take that bit of experience and learn from it as well. So I think it's very important that when you look back at your life, you should, of course you could have done things better. Of course you could have done things differently. And hindsight is marvelous, but unfortunately we don't have that.
Yeah.
But you can learn from what you've done, good and bad.
Yeah.
And that makes you a better person going forward and a better leader, I think.
Yeah, and from the sounds of it, you can't lose. So I mean, you'd welcome almost a wrong decision, so you can learn from it and
yeah, and I think you have to be honest with yourself as well.
Yeah.
Hubris is a problem. I've seen so many CEOs who've got egos which are out of control. You really do have to try and keep your feet planted on the ground and people around you. I mean, I was very lucky with my wife is somebody who is very grounded.
Right.
And she is very quick to bring me back to earth if there are any signs of straying.
Yes. It's a great wife quality.
Well, it's a partnership, and it's a valuable one, and you do need people to bounce things off and to help you. And certainly in the early part of my career, I didn't feel I needed anybody. I tried not. I guess I was arrogant, and a few people would have described me as arrogant. I didn't mean to be, but I probably came across as.
Yeah. You're on your mission.
Oh, I was on a mission. I sure was, yeah. I mean, I have to say, the first day I walked into the bank, I loved it, whatever, and my ambition then was to run it.
Right.
Because I thought, well, if it's it's good business and I like it, but why not run it?
Fantastic. Well, not a bad aspiration for your first day.
No, and I think it's important that you do have ambition. I think ambition is sometimes seen as a bad word. I don't think it is. I think it's a very good word. It's good to be ambitious and have a plan and have a vision. Now, it may change, but you've got to set yourself some sort of opportunity, some sort of goal to achieve. And that aspirational goal, if you can keep that as your umbrella, is a great one, and it can help you enormously.
I guess how do you balance that with? So I mean, you've got goals for example, when you're running the ANZ Bank, I mean that must have been a demanding role. So you've probably obviously got goals in that, and you'd have personal goals.
Yeah. Well, like anything, you have to compromise somewhere along the lines. But in terms of your career, if you think about it, most careers are going to last many, many years. And in that time, the balance between personal and business things will adjust.
Yeah.
Now, one of the problems is that at a time when you're really trying to make your mark, early 30s, that's going to be an incredibly important time in your work, in your career.
Yeah.
It's also generally a pretty critical time in your personal life with family, etc., etc.
Very young and very demanding.
And so that is the hardest time. That's the hardest time to actually balance that piece. And I have no magic answer for that. I mean, I was very much weighed down by the career piece to the detriment of my family. Yet I think I swum back very much.
Yeah.
And I was lucky that I had my wife was able to compensate for that.
Yeah.
Didn't necessarily like it or want it, but again, I think that's when you need that partnership to work.
Oh, definitely.
But it's not an easy one, And let's face it, if you're going to be a CEO of a major corporate major, a company with, with a market cap of 100 billion or whatever. Life balance is quite difficult because you're at it, 24/7.
Yeah, everybody wants to ask you a question.
Well, and you are on duty all the time. You're always on parade.
Yeah.
No matter where you are, holiday is not something you think about.
Yeah. Well, so just because you mentioned it, I mean, your 9 years at ANZ, did you actually get time to sit on a beach, or was it like?
Well,
what happens when you're at the top?
Well, what you do is work out where you can get what I call downtime and thinking time. And I used to actually like flights to just think and do, and not think about what you do day to day, but really think about what's happening in the world. What are the new issues out there? Where is technology going? Where are politics going? Where is the whole environment, the model of the economy? Where is all this changing? And actually, on holiday, what I would do was go to Europe. We bought a place in France many years ago as a lifestyle thing that because we moved around so much, the kids thought of that as home.
Yeah.
And why it worked for me so well there was the time difference was so good, because I'd have all my emails when I woke up in the morning, and I'd spend a couple of hours just doing them all, making a call and whatever.
Yeah.
Family weren't up yet.
Right.
They get up and that's the whole day, and everybody here's gone to bed.
Fantastic.
And so that really worked well, but you've got to try and do that sort of thing, plan that that you can get proper downtime and quality rest time, because frankly you need it.
Yeah.
You do need to recharge. There's anybody who thinks you can just keep on going, is not right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that you never sort of see the sacrifice. I mean, you see the CEO of one of the biggest companies here in Australia, but you don't really necessarily get to appreciate, the sacrifice.
Oh no, and the sheer amount of work, and the fact that you're waking up in the morning, the first thing you're doing is looking at your positions and where currencies have gone and how it's moved, and
Right.
When you think about it, if you've got close to $1 trillion balance sheet, that's an awful lot of money to be managing, and it's other people's money.
Yeah.
Then a good part of that is shareholders as well. There's a fair amount of shareholders' funds in there as well. So you've got massive responsibilities, to say nothing of 50,000 staff, and whatever. But your customers, be it 8-9 million of them, are going to expect you to, and quite rightly, expect you to look after their interests, as are your 500,000 shareholders, etc. So, again, if you can try and make sure that all those interests are considered in the same way, you're going to be more successful. Because if you run a business purely for shareholders, or if you run a business purely for staff or purely for customers, somebody's going to get upset.
Yeah, right. Wow.
Yeah.
So that was the first thing in the morning. How are we going? Gosh. Oh my gosh. Okay, so my next question was just, did you get any advice as you were coming through your career, or is there some advice you wish you got throughout your career that you could share with the listeners?
Look, I think most people have role models or people that they admire, that they see working, and I would say you have good and bad role models. I mean, bad role models are very useful, and you can see which is not effective, which doesn't work, which which pisses people off and whatever. So that's important to learn from that aspect as well.
Yeah.
But good role models, I mean, I was lucky in HSBC to have some seriously capable managers and bankers, really, really good people.
Yeah.
And you would yeah, you'd emulate what they did.
Yeah.
It was quite an aggressive style in HSBC. It was a sort of no prisoners type approach, but it was always done for the good of the company. It wasn't about yourself. It was what was the right decision to make for the company.
Yeah.
Quite selfless, and I admired that and I liked it. And as a result, the value system of that company was extremely strong, and that was something that was always been very important to me. I think you've got to do the right thing. Now, you can say that values are different in many cultures, many countries, many types of business, but fundamental decency is pretty important.
Yep.
To be doing the right thing.
Just the next question, was there habits besides checking the balance sheet each morning, which I'm sure you might recommend, but is there habits that you think have helped your career and, being the CEO of 29 years in HSBC and then 9 years here in ANZ? I mean, you're obviously doing something different to people that are in banking, and so what habits do you think?
Well, I guess the habit that I had was that I insisted every single day that I would always meet a customer, a staff member who didn't report to me, and a what I would call a mover, somebody of influence, and that could be a major shareholder, it could be a politician, it could be a media commentator or whatever. But it doesn't sound like much, one a day,
every day?
But this is every day.
Every day, one of each of those three, or
all of them.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. This is a lot.
Yeah.
Okay.
Every day. Now, sometimes I would meet dozens of,
Right.
depending on what I was attending or doing. But I feel it is incredibly important to keep touch with your organization. And that is the way of doing it.
Yeah.
So for a customer, of course, it's important to speak to mum and dad and the corner store as it is to the CEO of Telstra or whatever. It is also important to understand in your own business, and I used to have round tables once a week with junior staff, just to understand how they thought the business was going, and they could ask me questions about what I thought, because as a CEO, the big problem is that you are often told what people think you want to hear.
Yeah, right. I can imagine.
Yeah.
Maybe
So you have to find a way of getting a different feedback.
Yeah.
And it's amazing what you do learn and what you can pick up and change. So, look, I think touching the organization in any way you can is critical to success.
Yeah.
That requires huge personal involvement and time. And you have to be prepared to do that.
Yes. Oh, well, yeah, I can imagine 3 meetings a day, and I mean, just so much demand on your time.
Yeah, there's 1,000 other things going on, but it is critically important.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. The other question was just around if you had a quote that you've hung on to that you'd like to share with listeners, one of your own or someone else's.
A quote, right. Well, I think Abraham Lincoln's, you can't please all the people all of the time. That's a fantastic one, but you can say, you can please some of the people some of the time. You can't boil the ocean.
Yeah.
And I think as you get more senior, it's very hard to actually please everybody, and you have to accept that not everybody's going to be happy.
Yeah.
When you're young, idealistic, and starting out, you do want to please all the people all the time, and you suddenly realise there comes a stage you just can't.
Yes.
You just can't. And that takes a lot of self-confidence and belief in yourself to be able to do that, to know that plate, it's like spinning plates. You've got to allow a few to possibly fall off at times.
Yeah.
And you have to really work on the ones that need to be spinning, and then you move on. The other quote I love is a bit unusual, which is from Mike Tyson.
Right, right.
Who, when he was asked, did he have a strategy for his fight, he'd say, everybody has a strategy until they're punched in the face. And I think that's a great one, because no matter what your strategy is, something will happen that will knock it off. And what do you do about that? How do you adjust? How do you, what's your plan B, your plan C, your plan D? And that concept of contingency is so important. You've also got to be, I mean, my own quote is that, if you like, or it's not really a quote, but so much as a statement, is that the more senior you are in an organization, the more you have to look at the big picture.
Yeah.
But you have to understand that the big picture doesn't have a frame.
Right.
So you are managing ambiguity all the time.
Right.
Now, a lot of people hate managing ambiguity. They love to be in their slot in a box and know what they're doing and whatever. The more, but the more senior you get, the less you can do that.
Yeah.
I guess, the thing that I always look for in senior management was the ability to be visionary or to think strategically, but still act tactically.
Right.
It's quite rare.
Yeah.
Quite rare. It's not an easy thing to find people who've got that ability. You can get plenty of people who do the execution well, and plenty of people who are great at the vision and the strategy, but actually finding people who can do both, quite hard.
Yeah.
And I think that's, you can train yourself to do that, I think, but it's easier to be a visionary and learn how to do the execution than it is to be an executioner and learn the vision, I would say.
Thank you for sharing again. You've just sparked my interest with the punch in the face. And it makes me think to ask about the GFC and some of the great crises that you've managed through.
I think I've done 7.
7.
Something like that. 7 financial crises, of which the Argentine one was the worst, because it was so dramatic.
Right.
And the impact on everyday life was huge. In terms of the global downturn of the GFC, of course, that was probably the most major that we've seen in recent history in terms of its broad reach, which we're still going through the effects.
Yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned 7 in total in your career, and so it sort of makes you think that it's almost a natural thing for it to occur.
Well, it is, and particularly in banking, where you never learn from your mistakes. Actually, it's the same in all industries. It's amazing how the same story you read in history.
Yeah.
We don't learn enough from history.
Yeah.
That will be one of the things I'm always amazed at. I mean, you look at the politics now in Europe, and you think, does nobody remember what happened, just 70 years ago? And it is frightening that people do forget, don't learn from history, and make the same mistakes. Well, it's good if you're an accountant or a lawyer, I suppose, because, there's always work.
Well, Yes, some of our other interviewees are saying that they're up for grabs. They'll be outsourced and automated, and well, they're in the process of it. And so yeah, maybe nobody's.
Well, you know, we're in the next revolution. There's no doubt about it, and this is the technical revolution, which is as significant as the industrial revolution. We are looking at an old economy and a new economy, and the models and process that drove the old economy is just not going to work in the new one. Now, we're still probably going to make cars, but we'll make cars differently.
Yeah.
And it won't be here.
Yeah.
But it's really understanding, okay, what is important for the future? You know, what's going to create jobs for our kids? And I wish the politicians got hold of this, you know, because they don't seem to, you know, they're involved in the populist short-termism of the day, which means vision is by, you know, something next Thursday, you know, which is just hopeless. But we have to adjust, because Australia can't put its head in the sand and say, well, we don't need to change, and the rest of the world will pass us by. You know. So it's a huge issue, and yeah, you know, you can compare it to the Industrial Revolution. I mean, if you approached a farmer in the Industrial Revolution and said, look, I've just invented a steam machine that does the job of 20 horses. And the guy would say, well, I've got one horse and that does perfectly well for me because he's just going to do the same thing. Well, you've got to think, how do you use that 20 horses? How do you get the increase in productivity? How do you change the way you do things? And it's just the sort of same thing. You think 8 years ago there wasn't an iPhone in Australia.
Yeah, that's a scary thought.
It's staggering, really, isn't it? You know, and you know, think about sort of 6 years before that. That was the introduction of the BlackBerry. You know, think how that changed life. That's gone.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, this is another world. Oh, there'll be a few BlackBerry users out there who hang on to them, but yeah, I mean, it's amazing, really.
Very quick. Yeah.
Oh, and it will continue. You know, this is just, we haven't even started yet.
And so, what's life like for you now that you're no longer
man of leisure?
Well, yeah, are you a man of leisure? Do you get to relax now?
Look, I'm very fortunate in that I can do now what I want to do. I have not joined any public company boards very deliberately.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is that the corporate governance system in this country has now got out of hand, I think.
Right.
To the extent that you know, board meetings can be 95% process, compliance, procedure, and 5% business.
Right. Do you think that's why we're seeing more of these advisory board structures?
Well, I think it's sensible. I mean, what entrepreneur or business person is going to join a board? I mean, they don't want to do that stuff. Yeah. So what does it, you know, what type of person is attracted to a board? Well, it's people who've got a legal background or an accounting background who are used to dealing with that stuff. But that makes boards very risk averse.
Yeah.
Because you don't have that entrepreneurial flair. You don't have that ability, you know, that need to take risk.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's a problem for public companies. So that's one of the things that I have avoided. What I have got involved in is in the startup industry. You know, I'm chairman of York Butter Factory, and that's great fun. Not only is it joint space provider, but also an incubator. And the great thing about it is that it has a model that is developed with corporates.
Right.
So there are corporate partnerships, effectively. So if a company like ANZ, wants to do some innovative type of, they need a problem solving, they can give it to IBF, who can find the right company out there, the right way of dealing with it, that can work with their own, with ANZ's innovation people and come up with something quite different. Because if you try and innovate within a corporate culture, it won't really work very, very easily.
Been tried.
Well, corporate cultures tend to protect themselves. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it's like any maverick in a corporate, you know, within the, say, the executive body, will have their edges clipped off corporate culture is very strong at keeping self-preservation. Now, we're in a world where that ain't going to be enough.
Yeah.
So, so that's one thing I'm doing. I'm still working as an advisor with PwC, which I enjoy. And I'm involved with a couple of other smaller companies, which, you know, just I'm giving them a hand.
Yeah.
And I actually really enjoy it. So I'm doing what I want to do.
Yeah.
Which is a lovely place to be. It's the first time in my life that I'm in that place. And I'm growing wine, you know,
growing wine.
Yeah,
fantastic.
Yeah. So I've always enjoyed that.
When can we get the first bottle?
Well, we should have brought one along, actually. Then the interview will get better and better.
I'm glad you wanted to do the podcast today, and we could fit into your. Is it a leisurely schedule, or are you still?
No. I actually find I'm still working quite hard. But if I suddenly want to think, you know, the sun comes out and I want to go and spend a couple of days down at the farm, I can.
Great. Yeah.
And you know, the great thing about what I am doing now is that you're always connected, and with broadband, or you know, basically any decent wireless service, you know, you're in contact, and you really, it doesn't really matter where you are. Yeah. And for those face-to-face meetings, well, you can organise those in a week or whatever it is, you know. And it's still important. Relationship is so important in any type of business.
Yeah.
Things don't happen overnight. You know, you can't have lunch with somebody and say, well, you know, that's I've got a good relationship with someone. You know, you've got to work it, and so that's still important.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Just the last question before we let you go. Just a book. If there's a book that you've read that you recommend or that you're reading that you'd share with the listeners.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I read a lot, actually, and you know, I have a favourite book of the moment. And actually, a colleague of mine gave me a book called Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, which is really extraordinary, actually. And he wrote it more as a diary of observations. And as a Roman emperor, I mean, it's interesting that he wrote it in Greek. Maybe that was for to keep it private or something, but fascinating. And what he writes is extraordinary comments on common sense.
Right.
You know, the guy's common sense. And, you know, when you think about some of the great authors in history, you look back to someone like William Shakespeare or whatever, some of his observations of life are absolutely as relevant now as they were then, you know, which is so extraordinary, really.
That is.
And for somebody so young to have been able to get those gems of wisdom is quite remarkable. I just read a book written by Winston Churchill, which I hadn't read any of his stuff for a long time. And again, his way with words, the way that he uses words, absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
You know, extraordinary talent.
I didn't actually know he had Yeah, his own book, I'll be sure to link.
Oh, he's done lots of books. Every time he ran out of money, he'd write a book and publish it, and it would make. He made a lot of money from his.
Did you remember
his
the
writing.
name of that specific Winston Churchill book? Or?
Well, it's actually one of the. He did a history of the Second World War, and it was the first volume of that. So I think there are 6 volumes. So I've got to get through the others at some stage.
You've got time now.
Yeah,
Potentially.
yeah, hopefully.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think with books, the same with magazines. You've got to have something that interests you at the time. I might read a novel at the same time I'm reading a historical book, or I'm not big on management books. I find them a bit boring, because you often wonder, well, yeah. But I think there's nothing quite like doing it, and learning as you go along. But I know some people really enjoy learning, and that's good. I mean, to have an open mind is incredibly important. And if there is I think a key attribute that any executive should have, it's curiosity. It is so important that people are interested to think beyond what they do day to day.
Yeah, and it's in line with what you're talking about the big thinking, about not this self-preservation, but being curious and innovative.
Yeah, well, what are the better ways of doing it? I mean, this is why I love other cultures. When you look at the way other cultures do things and their value systems, you think, well, why is that? And what makes us right and them wrong? Or what makes them right and why don't we do a bit more of that? And these are the things that you can really learn from, which is important. And the same way of running a company, there are different ways of running things. There's no right or wrong way. There are just different ways.
Yeah.
And what suits you? A startup, a small business where you know everybody requires a very different structure to a multinational company. But fundamentally, you're there to make the company successful. I also believe that you should always be there to enjoy it.
Right.
If you enjoy what you do, you're going to be better at it than somebody who doesn't.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So if you're in a job that you don't enjoy, try something else.
Right.
That would be my advice.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Because otherwise you end up frustrated. You become cynical. You can become bitter, and then you become less effective.
So Mike, thanks for your time today, and thanks for letting us into your lovely office here in Melbourne. So just before we sign off, and people are listening, and they want to reach out and say they heard you on the show, or ask you a question or something. How would somebody contact you?
Probably the best way is through LinkedIn.
Through LinkedIn.
Yeah, and that's probably the easiest approach.
Fantastic.
But no, I've enjoyed it, and hopefully it's there's a few pearls of wisdom.
my pen's almost out of ink. So that's a good sign.
Anyway,
appreciate you making the time, and thanks for coming on the show.
No, it's great. Great to be here.
Thank you again.
Thank you for listening to The Mentor List with your host, David Lewis. If you like what you're hearing on The Mentor List, the best way to support the show is to just take a few seconds to leave a rating and/or comment over on iTunes. You can also find further information about this show and links to further episodes at mentorlist.com.au. Until next time, this is The Mentor List.